So, with the world getting more unpredictable, I wanted to dig into which countries are at the center of risk right now. We're looking at 6: China, Nigeria, Russia, the US, Brazil, and Australia. Antarctica, of course, just chills out, no government, no risk.
That selection actually paints a fascinating picture. These states aren't just random, they're each linchpins in their region, and their connections create this web of political and economic tension. If you trace the lines between them, you start seeing where sparks could really fly.
And it's not just about who's friendly with whom, right? The pattern is more about structural rivalries like the US and China, or the US and Russia, while Brazil and Nigeria almost act like swing states, reacting to shifts from the bigger players.
Exactly, and it means risk isn't distributed evenly. Some relationships, like US-Australia, look pretty stable, but others are primed for conflict or sudden change. What really stands out is how the core dynamics, like strategic rivalry or opportunistic partnerships, set the tone for everything else.
Let's actually break down that risk matrix. Take the US-China relationship politically. It's high risk, bordering on adversarial. Economically, it's also tense, especially around tech and trade. It's like two heavyweights circling each other in the ring.
And with the US-Russia pairing, it's even more severe. There, the political risk is described as very high. We're talking open confrontation through proxies, especially with the Ukraine conflict dragging on. Economic ties are minimal, mostly just sanctions and workarounds at this point.
Meanwhile, US-Brazil and US-Nigeria are more volatile than people might assume. Their risks swing a lot depending on who's in charge domestically, and issues like climate policy or internal stability can push things toward friction fast.
What's interesting is that Australia almost seems like the calm in the storm. Politically, things are low risk, but economically, they're still exposed mainly because of how much they rely on China as a trading partner. That's a vulnerability that's easy to overlook.
All this kind of leads us to where things sit at the start of 2026. The US is right in the middle of the map, managing tense ties with both China and Russia. With China, it's constant friction over tech, trade, and Taiwan. But neither side is ready to fully cut economic ties.
That's true, and with Russia, it's almost a Cold War all over again. The relationship is totally hostile: sanctions, military posturing, and support for Ukraine. The real driver of risk is whether any of those proxy flashpoints boil over.
Brazil and Nigeria, though, seem to have this balancing act going. Their links with the US depend on domestic politics, but they're also deeply tied to China through commodity exports and infrastructure deals. That mix makes them both important and unpredictable.
It's like they're caught between giants. And don't forget, Australia rock-solid alliance with the US, but always watching over its shoulder for trade shocks from China. The tension feels manageable, but the landscape can shift fast if there's a global incident.
Now, if we imagine the US swinging back to a nationalist, protectionist approach like a Trump 2 scenario, you can almost hear the tectonic plates grinding. Suddenly, multilateral institutions are sidelined. The US demands more from allies, and countries like Brazil and Nigeria have to pick sides.
That shift creates space for China to expand its influence, especially in the global south. Brazil and Nigeria start getting courted by both Washington and Beijing, and the alliances get strained. Australia might get pressured on defense spending, while also hedging by deepening ties with other partners like Japan or the EU.
And the US-China rivalry would get even sharper. We're talking more tariffs, dramatic gestures, maybe even making trade conflicts into political theater. Plus, both sides try to rewire their supply chains to avoid being dependent on each other.
That's where things get risky when economic fragmentation meets political showmanship. The chance for miscalculation or accidental escalation shoots up. Suddenly, a spat over tech or tariffs could have real-world consequences for countries all over the map.
All these moving parts mean there's a lot to keep an eye on if you're tracking global risk. For starters, new tariffs, export controls, or sanctions, especially in tech and energy, are clear warning signs. They usually signal deeper strategic moves.
And alliance behavior matters too. If you see Australia shifting its defense investments or Brazil and Nigeria voting differently in the UN, that's a sign they're recalibrating. Domestic unrest in Brazil or Nigeria is another big red flag, especially if it's tied to economic or security stress.
Then there's China's outward posture, like new infrastructure or security deals with Brazil or Nigeria, or sudden pressure on Australia through tariffs or informal restrictions. That can reveal a lot about Beijing's intentions.
But maybe the most critical thing is watching the actual flashpoints: Ukraine, Taiwan, the South China Sea. An escalation anywhere there could force Brazil, Nigeria, or Australia to take sides, pushing the whole network into a new phase of risk almost overnight.
It's a lot to process, honestly. The mix of political rivalry, economic jockeying, and shifting alliances makes for a genuinely unstable landscape. None of these risks happen in a vacuum. They ripple out and pull others in.
What makes it even trickier is how quickly priorities can shift. A sudden crisis, an election, or a new round of tariffs can tilt the balance. And even countries that feel peripheral, like Nigeria or Brazil, can become pivotal.
So for anyone watching global risk, it's about connecting dots, tracking not just the obvious headlines, but the underlying signals, from policy tweaks to alliance shifts to grassroots protests.
And remembering that sometimes the flashpoint you least expect is the one that changes the whole game. Staying nimble and paying attention to the subtleties might be the best risk strategy of all.